All right, if folks want to take their seats, feel free to grab coffee and food throughout the meeting. We've got way more than enough. We're gonna get started.
How are you?
Great, how are you?
I was thinking about you and all your travels.
Right back at home.
Yeah, right. I mean, if there's one place to land after a lot of travels, it's back at
We
home.
do get asked that all the time. We don't.
So folks, clearly we're not in the habit of meeting in person. 10 minutes past our start. It's great to see everybody. Good morning.
To start really.
No. Good morning. It's great to see everybody.
Good morning.
In person, it's great. There's folks who are joining us virtually. Folks, we look forward to seeing you all as well at sometime soon. As you can see from the agenda, we've got a lot to do today, so I'm going to keep my comments extraordinarily brief. Welcome our new members. We've got Kelly and the two Michaels. Welcome to you all. Glad to have you. Essentially, my comments today are thank you for your continued service on the board and really continued participation. It's time to flip a page, to stop just reacting to what's been happening and look ahead. So, we're looking forward to doing some strategic planning. Just before COVID, we'd really been about to take on a lot of good work, and we had to pause that work. So we're picking that up today. Tori has arranged for some guests from the National Governors Association Workforce Development Group to join us today. She's going to be introducing them in just a few moments, so welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Tori will also be introducing the strategic planning that we're about to undertake in more detail at the same time. So before we begin, I'm going to ask everyone to turn their attention to the screen, where we'll listen to a few prepared remarks from Governor Scott, whose travel calendar didn't allow him to be with us today.
Good morning. I wish I could be there with you today, but I appreciate the chance to share a few words with you remotely. And while I'm not there, it's great to welcome you to the Workforce Board's first in-person meeting since before the pandemic. It's been a long time since everyone's been together. To say a lot has changed is an understatement. While the last 2 years have been incredibly difficult, there have been a few silver linings. We learned new ways of doing things to be more flexible or more resilient. And we see the positive impact that individuals, businesses, communities, and government can have when we work together. What isn't new is our demographic crisis. For years, we lost workers and families from our state. Remember the 631 I talked about a few years ago? The 6 was for the 6 workers we were losing from our workforce every single day. We had started to slow those trends in 2018 and 19, but there's no doubt the pandemic set us back and made the problem worse. That's why it's more important than ever to figure out how we're going to grow our population and economy along with it. Fortunately, we wrapped up the legislative session the night of May 12th, and I'm pleased to say we made some progress, making significant investments to train and retain workers, especially in our healthcare sector, and putting more money into workforce recruitment, although the legislature didn't support all workforce investments I asked for. They also made historic investments in housing, which I know has been a bottleneck on the workforce front as well. And while this is important work, there's still so much more to do. And this is where you come in. Unlike many other policy areas, workforce development involves all of us across the spectrum. So many different agencies, departments, employers, nonprofits, and more. As you know, my background is in construction, and I see our workforce schools like building a house. We can have the best site contractors in the world installing the water and sewer infrastructure, master carpenters doing the framing and finish work, and an incredible architect creating innovative spaces throughout the home. But if all these people, masters of their craft, aren't working together to build the same house, they aren't going to have the quality or efficiency their customers expect. As we work to strengthen and build our system, it's important we're all pulling in the same direction and working towards the same goals. So I look forward to hearing what comes of your discussions today and see the final product of the board's estate plan. And I'm asking each and every one of you to stay focused, listen to one another, and have faith in the collective power of this group. Because I know the challenge of recruiting and training more workers seems daunting. But I'm confident if we work together the way Vermonters do, we'll create a better future for generations to come. So again, thanks for all you do for our state, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime very soon.
Great, well, that was a nice lead off for today's meeting. We do have a little bit of business to take care of. We have the approval of minutes which were circulated leading up to today's meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
To approve.
Is there a second? Okay. Any discussion, edits, amendments? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, the minutes have passed. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Tori, who's going to the rest of the meeting.
Great. Thank you all so much for coming in person. It was not our intention to have a hybrid meeting, but the way that we announced the meeting before, we decided to have it in person. So now it's a little bit hybrid. It might be a little bit funky, so we appreciate all of you bearing with us. Just for a couple notes for those who are on the Teams meeting, when we have our full kind of discussion, you can put comments or questions in the chat, which will come and follow up with you afterwards. And then at the end of that session, before we go to the breakouts, we'll have a time for Teams folks to have their comments and questions. It just makes it a little bit cleaner so that folks in the room aren't like worried if they're interrupting with folks on Teams. And also this camera, it's interesting if you're talking, it'll start to follow you wherever you are. So just don't be freaked out if all of a sudden you're talking and it zooms in on you, because that's going to happen. So in each of your folders, you have an agenda for today, the minutes, if we did it right, you have the agenda, the minutes, and then we'll have a survey that we're going to have you all fill in at the end. And we're going to continue to do this now throughout every other board meeting, because we want to make sure that each board meeting we do gets better and that everyone feels like they're getting something out of it, and that we're not wasting your time. So just at the end, we'll go through that. And then there's also the timeline that we're going to propose for the strategic plan. I say that with the caveat that this is not like a statutory timeline. No one's holding us to this. We'll work hard to make sure we hit it, but if things need to be adjusted, we'll communicate that as necessary to everyone in this room and everyone who's on Teams. So transitioning, before I set it up to the lovely ladies from NGA, we just want to talk a little bit about the last kind of where we've been, where we are now, and what we feel like the potential is for this board in the future. So as many of you know, I'm new to this role relatively now. It took over about 8 months. So, we've done a lot in the last 8 months. For those of you who were around before, obviously the pandemic kind of hindered the board's ability to work, do any of the things they were doing before the pandemic. So we've got ourselves back in federal compliance with all but one area, which is the one-stop operator, which we're working with VDOL and AOE and Voc Rehab to finalize our RFP for that right now. We've gotten back into our regular meeting schedules and engagements. I'm sure you're all very sick of hearing from Abby every week. We visited 10 counties and met with hundreds of businesses in the last 8 months, and it's been exceptional. We're going to finish we'll be through all 14 by mid-June. We've set up the new committee structures, which came from feedback from all of you that we need to be focusing on some industry specific and sector specific and system-wide specific issue areas and really dig deep into those. And while not a lot of the committee members are here today, it's been exceptional to engage some new folks, some business community folks in these conversations that aren't normally in these policy conversations. And we've got so far some really creative ideas and some creative charges from those. And I'm really optimistic to see how those committees are going to fall into our strategic plan. And then obviously this last session, a lot of stuff got done, not just on the workforce development front. I was joking with the legislature the other day that new legislators are going to think that we always deal with hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's just not the case. So it was a great session. A lot got done. And I think, we're looking forward to building on that progress. And we believe that the board is at a critical point where we can't just keep doing things the way we've always been doing them, and that we need to move forward. But to do that, I can't dictate that to you. I can't tell you what you need to be doing. We really need the expertise of the folks in this room, the folks on the Teams meeting, and the help of experts in the field on how to really make this a high-performing board and a high-performing workforce system. Go to the next slide. So where are we today? After 8 months, I have a pretty good view now of the workforce system. There's a lot of moving pieces and parts, and I think everyone would admit that there are many, many cooks in the kitchen. And I think one of our biggest issues right now is that there are silos, right? Not everyone is working together seamlessly. There's great work happening in different areas around the state, within state government, with nonprofits, with businesses, but it's not coordinated. And I think there's certain situations where we're spinning our wheels a little bit because we're not all moving in the same direction, and there's duplication of efforts. There's, missing of grants, there's all these things. So I think the biggest thing that we're looking to do, especially with this and ultimately, a real estate plan, is making sure that we're all moving in the same direction. Because again, there's many cooks in the kitchen, there's many people on this board. So we want to make sure that everyone knows their role, everyone knows their place, and that we all have a clear understanding of what levers need to be pulled to move forward. So that if we make a recommendation to the legislature, we can say, we're going to pull this lever because we believe it provides this return, and we actually have performance measures to back that up. But going along with that, I think momentum is moving in our favor. I think Senator Clarkson is on Teams, and we were talking about this yesterday or the day before, that there's never been a better time to be in the workforce development space because there's a lot of energy behind it. Businesses, nonprofits, government, everyone's really focused on this right now because it's become such a big issue in our state. And so I think we're at a really good point in time to be ready for action. So I won't read this all to you, but I wanted to give some context on what the board is, because I think we don't often think about this. A lot of times our meetings are us telling you what's going on, updating you on what's happening in state government, hearing your thoughts on that. So I just wanted to give you kind of a bird's eye view of what we're actually supposed to be doing. And to sum this all up, we're supposed to be playing a critical role in the workforce system, right? We're supposed to be kind of the engagement body with the business community on how to improve our workforce system and how to work together better. So the federal components of it are important, but the actual intent of the legislation is that we're making sure that we're creating clear pathways, that we know what credentials are available, that we are working together, that the system is aligned and it's coordinated, and that we provide recommendations and opinions on policy and different things going forward. The next slide. So I think our potential, and they'll touch on this later, but this is just from our bylaws, right? We just aren't doing this yet. But our potential is great. We're not limited in scope. We actually have a pretty wide scope. So, we can actually be a body that helps inform and guide state policies. I think that's been hard with our size in the past. And so I think utilizing committees, utilizing working groups, utilizing our time in board meetings with breakout sessions or different things like that will be critical. But I mean, if you just look at each of the things, there's so many different areas that we can touch on. And I think it's exciting for us to at least get our heads wrapped around some of the things that we can be involved in, like state performance accountability measures and assessment of core programs, developing a continuous improvement of the workforce development system, us evaluating how's the system working, who are the players, what levers are we pulling, what levers are not working, who's not working efficiently. So I think the board can have a clear role in making the system stronger and better if we really hone in on what does it mean to be successful at these things, right? It's one thing to say this. It's another thing to say, here's our goal. Here's a measurable goal. This is what success means. And these are the activities that we're going to continue to do at our board meetings, at our committee meetings, and then as staff to make sure that we're hitting our goals and we're achieving what we're doing. So that's really the point of this conversation today, is making sure that we don't just have a plan where we say, we believe in system alignment, system coordination. We all believe that, and there's 50 plans that say that. We want to make sure that we're able to actually get there and that everyone on the board understands their role, so that if I'm not the executive director, if Adam's not the chair, if there's a new administration in office, if there's whatever it is, the board is now run by someone else, it doesn't matter. The board has a clear, sustainable plan forever for the next 6, 12, whatever, 15 years. Go ahead, Abby. So turning that into this meeting, what we're really hoping to do, we understand, I know I and Abby are naive in that we've never done a full strategic planning process ourselves. We do not believe we're going to have a strategic plan after a 2-hour meeting. We're not under that impression, right? So today's meeting is really focusing on vision alignment and defining ourselves as a board and what success looks like as a board, and getting everyone's ideas out there and their thoughts and visions for the system. And then also setting the stage for what the work will be over the next 6 months, 12 months, 12 years. Okay. So we'll be going through, there's a timeline. We're going to go through that a little bit more at the end, just as after we have our discussions, but we'll be doing this work in phases, and we'll be utilizing committees. We'll be utilizing the one-on-one meetings I have with everyone. We'll be utilizing different stakeholder groups, so that we can make sure that everyone is all on board. And then in October, the hope that we can approve our strategic plan so that the work can start next year and we can have a really good, strong 2023. So I just went through that a little early, but go forward. But just as I said, phase 1, setting the stage. Let's get all of our ideas on let's figure out who the players are. Let's figure out all the systems. Let's map everything out. Figure out what data we need, figure out who's working in what spaces, get everyone's vision, opinions, goals all in one place. Phase 2, July and August, is really talking about framing what the plan looks like, review of all of the different materials that we've gotten, review of data, figuring out which things need to be incorporated, which things might not necessarily be a priority, and then September and October, full development and refinement, and then ultimately approval. We hope to have our meeting in October be fully in person, not hybrid, just as an aside for everyone, and we'll try to accommodate on times, but TBD on that. That's a long ways away. So, but anyways, with that, I will introduce our facilitators today. So we have Kate Ash and Rachel Stevens from NGA. I have to plug that Kate Ash is from Vermont and has been through all of this many times. She probably knows all of you even better than I do. And they do workforce policy and help assist workforce boards for the NGA and do a lot of technical input. So they have a lot more experience than Abby and I in this, and that's why we brought them in today to kind of help facilitate how we can be a high-performing board based on their experience with other boards. So thank you both for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome, thank you. It's great to be with you all. Rachel Stevens, Program Director for Workforce Development and Economic Policy at NGA. It's my first time in Vermont, certainly not Kate's. As Tori mentioned, I know Kate knows several of you in the room, so I'll keep my part here at the opening as short as I can and turn it right over to Kate here to lead some of our discussion in a few minutes. Thank you again for having us. And as Tori said, we're really here to kind of help initiate a conversation around kind of rethinking your role as a board, especially in the context of the moment and all the opportunities that are presented right now in front of you. So if you can, I'll actually have you via slides if you don't mind, Abby. Thank you. You can go ahead. I will quickly start by introducing kind of NGA briefly, just so you all kind of have a sense of who we are and what we do, what brought us here. You can go on to the next slide. The National Governors Association is the nation's only bipartisan membership organization for the nation's governors. So we exist to serve and work with our 55 governors of our states and territories. And through NGA, governors have a chance to speak with a collective bipartisan voice where there are areas of agreement on national policy, global policy, and they get opportunities multiple times per year to come together as governors and just talk kind of one-on-one, share things with each other about their roles, their challenges, and things that are going well in their states. Next slide.
Rachel, just, should we turn the camera to face you so that for the folks, for the,
They're using the remote.
Thanks for
Um,
pointing that out.
The
just
other
thinking
one.
for the people on this. on
Thank
the-
you. No, I didn't notice. I was waiting for it to.
I mean, they may like looking at Adam's side profile.
Yeah, here,
That's
here,
not
it's not getting to see any of the speakers, so that would be fabulous.
Does this work if I kind of do it with this? No, not really.
So
That's
now we
not
get
ideal, is it?
looking at it.
I was thinking we could just twist the camera and aim it towards, and then you could go back to where you were. So you, because that looked uncomfortable the way you were.
Thank you, Tom.
Unless you're an owl.
Yeah. Okay.
Hopefully I didn't
Sorry
bring
about
it.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank
All right, so NGA, Governor Scott is of course quite involved in NGA, he's a very active member. We do have 3 task forces, which is how we organize governors who are really interested in key issues and priorities that they share, again, on bipartisan lines. And these groups kind of organize how we advocate as an organization to federal policymakers and organize how we, on teams like mine, which I'll talk about in a moment, think about our work and where we want to focus on helping states. Your governor is a member of our Economic Recovery and Revitalization Task Force. You'll see the topics listed here. A range of topics, certainly including some I know are important to Vermont. I know that economic development and really kind of thinking about how to grow and support the economy, and especially small and mid-sized businesses, is something very important to this governor, and something we've really seen kind of present in the workforce development space in Vermont as well. So we're very pleased to have your governor be a member and be able to come and support you all in this way. Next slide, please. My team is in the NGA Center for Best Practices. This is kind of the consulting and research arm of NGA, and we exist to kind of take what governors are doing and talking about kind of at their peer level and bring that work to supporting governors' executive leadership. So we support executive branch leaders and across a number of policy areas you'll see listed here. And last but not least is working with policy. But we also have fantastic teams working in areas ranging from human services and the Children and Families Program, energy, healthcare, infrastructure, and so on. We provide a lot of different types of assistance and supports to state leaders on behalf of their governors. So we provide customized technical assistance if you have a particular research question, want to know what another state is doing on a very specific policy or type of program. We can provide that research to you. We can also customize strategic planning sessions, facilitation opportunities like what we're doing today. We also engage in multi-state kind of peer learning opportunities through developing cohorts of states focused around specific topics. So for instance, we have ongoing work right now focused around disability employment and training, we're focused on apprenticeship, we're focused on economic mobility and work supports, and a number of other efforts. Go to the next slide, please. Just a quick kind of, here's the mission for my program. As you can imagine, I know we just kind of provided our whole NGA context. We work across a range of policy issues, really focused around a lot of the same goals and objectives you all have here in the state of Vermont. So my team is able to really, provide and leverage a lot of expertise, not just among our staff, but among our networks of states and among our national partners and organizations we work closely with as well. Slide, please. We're here as one part of my program, so I'm kind of narrowing this down to kind of what exactly brought us here. One core element of what my program team offers is the Workforce Development Technical Assistance Program. This is an ongoing program that's been in place for about 30 years now. And through this program, we're really focused on workforce and leadership towards workforce agency leaders. We also engage governors, workforce, education, or economic policy advisors if they have advisors in their offices focused on these issues. But this is really a program focused on peer learning, professional development, and direct technical assistance and support to state workforce board leaders and to state workforce agency leadership. We do a lot of different things. I won't go through the whole list, provide a range of services and opportunities. I know your chairman has participated in some of our in-person convenings in the past, and we've had others participate in some of our activities as well. But again, we also do things that we're doing today, in addition to providing ongoing support following engagements like this. All right, any questions about just NGA really quick before we jump into the fun part? I'll bring us back to what Tori was talking about. All right, good. So we're here to talk about our high-performing board framework, and this is a framework NGA developed over many years of experience working with boards, even before WIOA was WIOA, and that NGA developed when the 2014 legislation kind of reshaped and revamped some core elements of how boards were meant to kind of be structured and function. And we've really built out the framework since then. So that's what we're here to talk about today. I think some of you, especially if you've been engaged on the board in Vermont a long time, or several years, I should say, several years, might have seen this before in different iterations. So I'll just preface it with that. This was developed in partnership with our network of state workforce board chairs. We do operate an affiliate association that my team supports of state workforce board chairs that really informed this resource. So before we jump into this, I'll take a moment to kind of pick up on something Tori brought up in her opening. Tori really talked about kind of a bit about the timing and the opportunity and kind of what we're here to do. And I'd love to hear perspectives from you all around the table and on teams about why high performing board matters. Why does it matter in Vermont to think about moving from a compliance focused board to a performance and strategy focused board, and why right now?
I'm not sure this is too high level, but I recently retired from the investment industry, and what I've seen over the past 30 years in this country is basically a trade-off of trading profits, jobs for profits. The jobs have gone overseas, the capital's gone overseas. And I think there's one good thing that came out of the pandemic, all the supply chain disruptions that we've had. A lot of business is going to get reshored, and this is a secular, and that's why I'm saying this might be a little bit too big picture, but there's a secular trend that's going to take place in this country of reshoring a lot of this productive capacity. And the only way that's going to happen is if we have the skills in our labor force to provide those jobs. Those jobs are going to be very high-paying, manufacturing-based jobs, and Vermont should get a slice of that. I mean, I know everybody thinks of skiing and the vacations and things like that when they think of Vermont, but really in certain pockets in the state, we have some very deep manufacturing skills.
Mm-hmm.
Springfield, Vermont, Rockingham, and I think that this is why I'm involved. I want to be over the next 2 to 3 decades involved with making sure that Vermont gets its slice of the secular trend that's going on, and it's a big job. And it starts off with the training that's going to be necessary to be able to provide those workers for that secular shift that's going to happen. So, yeah, I'm new to this, so I'm not sure. This is
Good.
This is,
Yeah.
too big picture or whatever,
I can,
but that's where I'm coming from.
and I can see why you're engaged. It's why, industry leaders and people with different experiences across the state are engaged in this work. And you're really pointing to something that applies, not just in the manufacturing sector. That's a big trend. It's an important trend to be aware of and to be thinking about capitalizing on. It's a great example of why having a body like this that can really think strategically about kind of what's going on in that bigger picture, and then how to kind of pull in some of the specific funding streams, program opportunities to support really addressing and capitalizing on those opportunities is really important.
The data that I've seen shows that, demographically and the distribution of jobs in the state are in healthcare. And essentially, I think of this as a state that's becoming a caretaker state. You take care of me, I take care of you, but that doesn't really create any wealth. So what you need is you need to produce things, and again, the high-paying manufacturing jobs that can go with that to really create wealth. So again, I've got a bias on this and a perspective. I'm not sure that helps, but that's where I'm coming from.
Sorry to interrupt, but for those of us on Teams, we have no idea who was speaking. So if people would be kind enough to introduce themselves, that would be great.
Big flag, thank you. All right, well, other folks say your name before you, and maybe your affiliation, your organizational affiliation before you jump in. Yeah.
Tom Longstreth from Resource. I think one of the by definition, by the framework of the board is to bring together the administration, the legislators, the employers, and the providers of different training and educational services, and so that there can be a conversation and an evaluation of how things are currently working. I don't think we've been doing that very effectively or very well. I think we do have some opportunity, but I think we can be much more directed in doing that. And then perhaps gain some consensus around what sort of policy decisions, policy recommendations we are making. I mean, I think it seems like it would be helpful if we could get to the point where we were making recommendations that represented the full board to the legislature, to the government agencies that are currently doing things without much input from us, I think, as a board. And so I think that if we could move our internal processes to that point, that would be quite helpful.
Bring this collective together really to one voice would be very impactful. Absolutely. Any other kind of quick thoughts or additions here? Right now, yeah.
Mike Harrington, Commissioner, Department of Labor. A couple different things. I think the board has done a lot of good work just in the past 6-7 years with this administration. It's gone through a couple different executive directors in that time, 3, and also a lot of change at the department as well. But coming from an organizational development background, I think it's always important to begin with the end in mind, right? Like, where are we trying to get to? So we can talk about what actions need to be in place, but if we don't have a common understanding. I think when we look at the Vermont's board, which is very unique, I think, compared to other states as a single state, we're one of only a couple single states where a lot of the workforce and compliance components rest within the Department of Labor as opposed to the state workforce board, although the board does play some crucial roles in key areas. But at the end of the day, if the goal is to be able to provide recommendations, like Tom said, on policy and strategic vision towards what we're trying to achieve, we have to have the right people around the table. And the right people around the table will only show up if they think the board is relevant and value added. And so I think what we've seen also over the years is that the board may have been a compliance board, or it may have just been a rubber stamp committee. But I think that has changed with this administration, with Adam coming on as the chair, and obviously with Tori as the director, wanting to actually make great steps and take action. And so my hope personally is that reinvigorates the board as an entity and gets the right people around the table, the major players across the state when we talk about employers or other community partners and decision makers, so that when we do make recommendations, whether it's to the governor or to the legislature, there is credibility behind the board and an understanding and a belief that the board is speaking from a place of knowledge and understanding.
Absolutely. There's a lot in there. I think you really encapsulated the call to action so well. I think the piece about key players is really important to consider too, having the right people at the table and what will make sure that they are at and stay at the table. And I think embedded in your comment is the fact it's kind of a building effect. It's not necessarily overnight, but there can be important strides made, starting with a meeting like this, with a strategic planning process that this group is going to be going through to really begin to build toward that. You can go to the next slide. I will start to just kind of quickly go through our framework, and we'll really then get a chance to dive into the framework in the context of Vermont. So at a high level, our high-performing board framework includes 3 core functions and roles within the state that really all of you've actually touched on already in your comments toward your opening. These are convener, connector, and conductor. Set and communicate a vision for the workforce system and really convene partners, all the right players around that one shared vision. Connect through strategic partnership development, model and develop and manage and maintain partnerships that are going to be essential to meeting the industry needs that are evolving in your state, to making sure people are kind of rowing the boat in the same direction across different agencies. And conductor, make sure things are moving on track. There's certainly a compliance element to this, but it goes beyond that to really thinking about how to keep the whole system accountable, using data, making sure everyone's working in tandem to achieve that vision that you set. I'll dig into each of these just briefly. If you can go to the next slide, we'll start with convener. Starting with the strategic vision, we'll talk about the Vermont vision statement in a minute, but some good news, you've already got a really phenomenal vision statement in our opinion. We've seen a lot of them. You guys have a good one. And really making sure, that a vision builds around existing assets, work that's been achieved to date, places that you want, directions you want to be going in based on what businesses and workers need, what funding opportunities you have, and so forth. aligning goals to that vision and making sure that your subcommittees or task forces, your kind of structure as a board really feeds directly into the goals that you've set that are going to achieve that vision. And of course, making sure you're champions. Having the right people around the table and making sure they stay at the table and attracting new partners needs champions. It means that you've got to be able to kind of communicate who you are, what you're doing, why it's a value add, and what that vision is that you're working toward. Next slide, please. Connecting. The board is really all about connecting and partnership. You guys have already started to talk about that quite a bit. So I think we'll really have a big opportunity here to dig in a little bit to what types of partnerships you can strengthen or work to improve through your strategic planning process. But really, you know, there's an element here around coordinating and aligning across the federally funded workforce system, the WIOA system, as well as other entities, education, human services, labor and commerce, community organizations, philanthropic work that's taking place in your state, really being able to kind of cast a wide net and really bring everyone in under one vision. I actually really like the governor's house building analogy. I hadn't heard that before. I might steal it, but to really have everyone kind of building the same house for Vermonters to be able to live in and navigate through. And of course, developing investment strategies that really kind of tie in with state and regional economic development goals. The board certainly has an opportunity to do that as well. Please. As a conductor, I think a lot of what I've been talking about is kind of walking the walk, or excuse me, walking the talk, right? Like you want people in your communities to be working together. You want, you know, programs to be well coordinated, services to be coordinated for an individual. It's really important that the board kind of models that coordination and partnership at the board level. Then there's, of course, the real kind of nuts and bolts of accountability, creating benchmarks for the system and for yourselves, conducting a data analysis, making sure you understand kind of what data you do have and don't have and where the opportunities are across different regions, industries, demographic groups in your state, making sure you're using that, of course, to make all of your decisions and really establishing a strong evaluation and assessment process. There's, again, components to that, but there's also work you can consider doing beyond that as well, where you think there's science requirements might fall under short of what you want to be looking at. All right, we can talk here about operationalizing it. We kind of sat down and thought about across all the boards that we've worked with over the last several years, what are some general things we've seen work well that this board might want to think about? Every board's different, as I forget who said that now, but every board's different, every state's set up a little differently. Some of these may or may apply in differing degrees. Again, this first one, maybe it's checked off, but we will have a chance to kind of revisit and reassess kind of where that vision statement stands and if this group really likes it as it is. Mapping your existing assets, programs, champions, resources, work to date, what's already happened that serves as a good foundation. Looking at existing data as well as those data limitations to inform your recommendations and next steps. And thinking about how the board governance structure fits into all of that. We've seen a lot of boards that are kind of set up and really kind of maintain momentum after taking on a kind of revamped strategic planning process like this, tend to structure themselves with an executive committee that's kind of able to steer policy, strategic planning, basic board operations, and other core kind of functions that I mentioned in that framework. And these subcommittees then establish an alignment kind of with the vision and plan the board has laid out, with subcommittee chairs kind of represented on the executive committee to ensure that that kind of executive committee really is steering kind of all parts of the board toward the same vision, kind of the same way you want all the players in your broader ecosystem working toward the same vision. And with this, I would love to stop here. We'll have a little discussion. I'll invite Kate up. I think you all know Kate, but Kate, if you'd like to introduce yourself before we get started, I've already went to the education.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be home. As Rachel mentioned, as Tori mentioned, Adam, I'm Kate Ash. I'm an independent consultant, and I have the great honor of being under contract now with NGA for almost 3 years and serving as a consulting director of the Workforce Innovation Network, which is one of the NGA Center's largest initiatives, an initiative of the Workforce Development and Economic Policy Program, really designed out of the pandemic to help governors and states build capacity for transforming their workforce systems for the workforce needs of the future. So it's really fun to be at home, to get to bring a little bit of Vermont, or NGA rather, to Vermont, a little bit of Vermont to NGA perhaps. And really we'll be spending some time over the next couple of minutes really diving into how we can consider really operationalizing the framework specifically for Vermont. And I'm going to actually come over here just to make sure we can both be on camera, say hello to some friends on Teams. So I think the one thing we wanted just to touch on briefly, there's a lot of work that has already been done by this board, by the leaders in this room, by the General Assembly, certainly by the governor, by many of those of you who are calling in today. And I think really what we want to make sure we're helping this board think about is what this plan is for, who this plan is for. Tori, Adam, and Abby have really set a strong foundation for making sure that this board has a strategic plan for its operations. And Ellen, I actually saw your comment here that, you know, this strategic plan should be for the board. And in fact, we know that there's already been a lot of great work to date in setting the vision for the Vermont workforce, what its workforce development and economic policy system should look like. We'll actually talk through those 4 pillars that are on your website in just a couple of minutes. But we know that the governor has made this a very strong priority, certainly of this last legislative session. And we know that, as Adam mentioned, there's been a lot of work to date over the last several years to really start to bring together some of these strategies. So here is your WIOA state plan vision, the vision for the workforce system. And as Rachel mentioned, this is a strong vision. It incorporates a lot of the components that you talked about that are especially important to the state's workforce system, that's responsive to some of the changes, certainly in whether it's the supply chain or the future of the workforce. And really, I think one of the important things for us to think about is, you know, if this is the vision for the state's workforce system, what is the vision and the mission of the board? What is the board's role in really helping the state achieve this goal long term? And WIOA is one of many tools. And however, it's not the only tool. We know we have a lot of partners in the room who are leveraging other resources, whether those are state, whether those are federal, whether those are philanthropic. And so much of our work over the next hour and 10 minutes or so, and your work over the next several months and likely years, we'll be thinking about how to really operationalize many parts of this framework to help achieve this vision. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, you know, really as we transition into considering the evolving role of the board in supporting this mission, we wanted to take a couple of minutes to acknowledge some of how the foundation has already been laid. Again, I'll borrow from the governor's analogy here. There is a strong foundation for how previous general assemblies have appointed workforce groups and sub-cabinets to begin looking at ways to align and integrate many of these services to support the workforce. Certainly the General Assembly has acted. We know that there were some regional outreach that took place prior to the pandemic. And of course, there was a modified plan that was submitted earlier this year. And based on Kendall's report, we know there were a number of achievements that the support of the legislature to really make some new investments, including this new Special Oversight Committee that will also have some recommendations. Again, you know, I think really our priority here is helping you all recognize that there's already a very united focus on this work. This is very clear, and the opportunity, at least in the short term, is thinking about how to operationalize some of the convener, the conductor portions of the framework to help make sure this board is performing in highest capacity. One thing, we had the opportunity actually to spend some time with Kendall at another convening hosted by NGA earlier this week. And one of the points that she brought up when we were talking with other states is how well the state is really aligned around key performance indicators and how much, whether that's the agency administration, the governor, various agencies are really leveraging various performance indicators and measurements to move partners across state government towards success. We'll be spending some time in just a few moments, you know, beginning to talk about how to operationalize some of the pillars of this work into some short-term and longer-term goals. And so there's a lot of great work in that area to be building off of. So again, you know, many of you have been with the board for a long time and really want to acknowledge your leadership thus far. Bye. So why don't I just take a few moments to pause here and recognize really what the 4 pillars of the work that have been communicated by this board, by this governor, are. Again, so much of this work has been done. Our purpose is to help really build on that foundation. So here you have your mission, of course, the vision rather, in the state plan, as well as these 4 areas of focus: relocation and recruitment, education and training, system alignment, and workforce supports. As I mentioned, based on some of the high performing board components or pillars rather, what we will be encouraging many, and I know, you know, Tori's talked a lot about this with us over the last several months that we've been working with the board leadership, is how to help the board turn some of these pillars into short and long-term goals. What would success for relocation and recruitment of the workforce look like? What would the board's role be in this? Similar to education and training, there are many industries that have already been identified as subcommittees, as areas of focus, whether that's manufacturing, retail, hospitality, healthcare, et cetera. Really, what is the board's role in helping define those career pathways, and what would success in those look like? And similar to system alignment, how is WIOA one of many tools, perhaps, that can be used as an accountability metric to help really align partners in the short and long term? And of course, I personally love that Governor Scott, in his State of the State address, said that housing policy is workforce policy. I think, he's really been out in front, as have many of you, community and business leader partners, in really making sure that Vermonters, individuals and families, especially those new Vermonters, have the types of supports they need, not only to enter the workforce, but be sustained. So as I mentioned, we'll be spending some time, next slide actually, we'll be spending some time to really explore these guiding questions. We'll actually, wow, right time, look at that. In the next couple of minutes, we'll be transitioning to some breakout groups. We have some, we'll walk through the activities in a way to make sure that our virtual partners can participate as well. But would love, before we do that, maybe just to pause for a moment and maybe just grab some early reflections. What about the high performing board framework either stands out to you that you feel like you may already be doing well here in Vermont, where there are areas for growth, or what, before we go into breakout groups, do you see as the greatest opportunity for the board's role in each one of these pillars of work?
I mean, not to be too simplistic, but basically action. I mean, whatever actions that we can create, whether it's bringing schools together with local businesses, private enterprise together with the state and working together. So it's really just activity, which begets the end result of more jobs and growth in the economy, et cetera. I mean, I don't think it's really complicated. I think it's pretty straightforward. It's the metrics to measure success would be job creation and standard of living increase. And so it's the actions that we take. And again, I'm new to all this, so I'm probably going to make a lot of comments that don't make a lot of sense to the people that have been doing this forever. The thing that I find is there's so many people coming at this from so many different directions, and they all have the best intentions and they're working really hard to make it happen. They just don't know about each other. So any kind of connections that we can make and then start to see actions happen, whether it's a job fair at a school or, whatever that is, it's that to me is going to be anything we can do to kind of be the grease in the wheel to make all this stuff come together. I think it's going to be measured in actions that we generate as a result of our ability to spread the word, if you will, in terms of you need this, this is where you go, you need this. I mean, it's pretty simplistic, the recommendation, but it's pretty basic.
But it's hard work. It's hard work. And there's a big and complex system, and how to essentially siphon that down and communicate that to a variety of stakeholders. It's a different message for a business. It's a different message for an individual. It's a different message for a community partner that's doing service delivery. I hear you talking about information sharing. I hear you talking about, again, kind of walking the talk, so to speak, as well as really enabling local partnerships. I saw Chris raise his hand on Teams, and Abby, maybe if you can help us make sure those voices can be heard.
Definitely. Yeah, this is, can you hear me? It's Chris Loso from Loso Janitorial. I've been on the board for a while. I think one thing, and I think this kind of echoes a little bit what Mike Harrington has said before, is we need to think about what we have more control in terms of, like, we talk about our actions and being action oriented and achieving some results. I think one of the factors we have to take into consideration, because as a business owner and being involved with various committees with business groups throughout the state, one of the themes that I heard loud and clear back in 2019 with the RDCs and the various meetings that we had around the state before the pandemic were our issues that are really, I think, have an impact on what we do for work, but also we don't have a real impact directly in terms of making change. At least I don't think so at the outset. One of them would be childcare, housing, and transportation. And that came across loud and clear with businesses across the state. And I know I'm affected by that in terms of people that I employ into my business. So one thing we might need to think about, I see a lot here talking about the career pathways and so forth. What can we achieve in our role as a board, and maybe what can we help to influence in terms of giving back information, feedback back to the administration and the legislators in terms of other areas that also need to be worked upon, because as the governor said, workforce development is housing and all these other areas that encompass as well. So there's a lot of different components that need to work to make this thing happen. So even the actions that we take, it's not just us. There's many different things that need to take place to make this successful. I hope that makes sense.
It does, Chris. And for those who can't see the board that Rachel is writing on, just noting, not so much an evaluation, but an acknowledgement of what may or may not be within the statutory or even realistic scope and role of the board, but what impacts the workforce and where can the board essentially act as one voice, perhaps, to advocate on the issues that are important to employers.
Hi, I'm Mary Ann Sheehan. I work for the Vermont Business Roundtable. And I'd like to comment on something that Mike said earlier, which is to begin with the end in mind. If the end in mind is that we're going to advance the skills and education of our community, what are the skills that we need? So defining those are pretty important. I use a model called Talent Pipeline Management, which is a national model. And we could do more of that. Scale that into the industries that Vermont is supported by. I think it would be really helpful to have an action plan for the jobs that we're looking to. So.
And may I dig into that a little bit, Mary? Nice to see you, by the way. What would you see as the ideal role for the board in that particular talent pipeline management system?
The board could help identify what the most critical industries are in our state that we need to be targeting.
May I jump in with actually a Pollyanna moment here?
Go ahead.
Hi, Allison Clarkson, Senator, Vice Chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and strong workforce supporter, and thrilled actually with our bill S11, where we're hopefully advancing this ball. I just want to give an example of actually how the board, through its subcommittees, worked very effectively to enact a piece of legislation that it is sadly was derailed by COVID, but which will, I hope, have productive results. And that was, we had a great, very strong subcommittee working on what are the barriers between the stigmatized CTE centers and main high school education. And we looked at how could we reduce those barriers? How could we help eliminate the competition for funding between the CTE centers and high school budgets? And we asked for pilots, and that sort of got derailed during COVID. It's getting back on track, but that was a great example of the board subcommittee working, developing legislation which got passed, which hopefully will have results that we can act on to actually reduce some of the most troubling and frustrating barriers that exist between one of our most important training partners, which is our career and technical education centers, and high school. And so that was actually, I thought, a great example of how we can work really effectively together to achieve results.
And I'm thinking as well, as especially someone who's certainly in a leadership position, has been on the board, being able to point to those good examples and how that happened where did the leadership come from? Who are the necessary partners in the room to bring those strategies to scale? It's great. I think we have time for maybe one more comment before we transition into breakout groups. And I think it's the commissioner had some comments or.
Yeah,
Okay.
and my comment was just really brief, and I wanted to highlight it because it was the exchange between you and Mary Ann, which, as a board, we often talk like big picture, like we want to grow Vermont's workforce and upskill Vermont's workforce. The board doesn't actually, right? So what we have to be able to eventually get to is what is the actual activity that the board does in that situation, right? So to be able to do our own research and come out with the leading industries that we want to highlight and suggest is a great thing that the board can actually do. And so I do think, and I think we'll get there through the goals and then drilling down into how to achieve those goals. But we often talk big picture, and then I think we all walk away going, okay, but how does the board grow Vermont's workforce, right? And so I do think we have to say, okay, but what is the board's role in growing Vermont's workforce?
Yeah. And I think that kind of throughout the conversation, what you guys are getting are some really clear roles for the board in terms of connecting information sharing, doing some of this type of research building, and then being able to use the recommendations, the information you're gathering to then help drive and guide agency action and where each agency, including yours, can plug in.
Yep, exactly.
Perfect. Yeah.
And I want to acknowledge Frank. I see your hand. We do need to, great to see you, Frank. I think we do need to transition to some breakout groups, but I encourage for folks who are joining us virtually to enter your comments or questions, and we can circle back to those both in the breakout groups that Abby and Tori will be facilitating virtually, as well as when we come back as a full group. I also, just before we break, that was a wonderful transition. Almost like we got to that. I want to give the governor's office just a moment to respond.
Oh, I was just gonna kind of put a bow on a couple of the things that others have said about the board's scope of impact. And I think the theme I'm hearing there is something Kate, you were talking about earlier, which is right scaling the mission.
Like that. Right. But with that, what do you say we transition into some smaller groups and really continue this conversation and maybe right sizing our small group vision to dig into some of these tangible action steps? Begin to maybe dig in a little bit from 30,000 feet, maybe 10,000 feet. We come down a level or two. So for those who are, I was actually just going to say, if you want to transition to the next slide, actually. Yes, here we are. So we're actually not going to break you up into topical. We're just going to kind of run around the room. But these are going to be the 4 areas of focus that we're going to encourage each of your groups to explore with essentially one key question, which is you as a board member, when you, are participating in the board, working with your colleagues, working with your businesses and community partners, what is the ideal role of the board in helping the state and the board to accomplish its mission and vision with these 4 pillars of work in mind? And again, we don't need to come away with super numeric or time specific goals just yet. If you want to take that step, you get an extra point. But that will be the work that will be continued after today. So Tori and Abby are going to be facilitating 2, I believe, online sessions.
So for those who are online right now, you're gonna be able to see our beautiful faces and not just on the screen, but we're gonna go into a separate room and we're gonna facilitate the breakout session virtually. And then in the room, Adam, Kate, and Rachel are going to facilitate in 3 different sections, smaller breakout sessions in person. So there won't be like noise everywhere, but we're going to stay on the same meeting just because of all the different tech. We don't want to lose everyone. So.
And the goal will be essentially spend the next 35 minutes or so kind of chewing on these questions, diving into the topics a bit more, and then we'll come back to each one of the groups who report out. We'll do a little bit of consensus building. And then, believe it or not, we'll be almost to the end of our time. And all of this will really help build the momentum moving forward. So I might say we want to just break up into groups of 5, and you folks take that corner and you that home.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Done.
Okay. Any questions? Great.
Hello, I'm just transitioning to the other room. Thank you all for bearing with us with the camera. It's supposed to follow you everywhere you go, but I think there's probably too much noise in the other room for it to actually follow everyone. All right, can everyone hear me okay? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So your camera's still on in the other room, but they can't hear you. They can only see you. So don't, flip anyone off or anything, but you should be fine. So I guess since obviously it's hard with the virtual aspect, I just wanted to get people's initial thoughts and conversations about the framework and the facilitation and kind of hopes for next steps. And then we'll run through some of the issue areas to talk about just some brainstorming goals, potential activities that the board can do to help move forward in the key issue areas. So feel free to just talk out, and you don't need to raise your hand. And if I have to referee, then that's fine too. Should I start offering prizes for folks if they speak up? Frank,
Terry, I'll speak
you
up.
raised your hand. Go ahead, Frank.
So I'm new. Oh yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
Frank. It's okay.
Thanks. First of all, thank you. Is Allison still on as well, Senator Clark?
Yeah, I think she just joined in.
Okay.
I got kicked off. Who knows how
Oh,
it
okay.
happened, but I'm glad to see you, Frank. Long time
Yeah,
no
great
see.
to see. Great to see.
Also,
Ellen
just for
and-
everyone, just a technical thing, Frank, sorry, before you go, we didn't unshare the presentation, but if you switch you click on the three dots at the top and you switch to large gallery, you can see everyone's faces and not the presentation. So that just helps a little bit.
Okay. Great, thanks. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to the governor, Tori, and your team, Commissioner Harrington, Lindsay, Joan, everyone that worked so hard. And Senator Clarkson, you did an amazing job. And I know that Representative Tolino did a lot of stuff, as did Ellen Kaler. And I wanted to thank them. It really takes a team to get through, and Charlie Kimball did a great deal as well. The governor really seems to understand the CTE portion of it. I will tell you, in my 10 years of focusing on CTE, our problem is governance and funding, and we're likely not to see changes until we have governance and funding changes. And we can do all the pilots that we want to do, but that's our problem. And I'm not going to go off on that soapbox. I can tell you that the private sector isn't waiting for government or education. They appreciate everything that's being done. If you think government moves slowly, education moves even slower than government. But government and education are moving now. And thank you for everything that you're doing. We're not growing our state's population, and we're just growing in a very meager way economically. And then we had the pandemic hit. And so, this has been really, really a tough time. And thank goodness for our congressional delegation and the governor, and our team of elected officials in the legislature as well. We're getting all the federal resources that we got to keep the economy going, helping employers keep labor well, they were challenged. But if you're in manufacturing, things just got a lot worse. If you're in anything, healthcare, I don't care what business you're in, ask Chris Loso what it's like to try to find an employee, and then go down to the lowest service sector level. Things are really bad. All I want to say is GBIC is going to focus the next year on working with a team in our region. And we're going to focus on CTE in our region because Burlington is looking at building a new technical center, and we have a technical center in Essex. And we're going to try to focus on what is going on in our region, building ideas for the state as well as we do this. And we're pulling together a group of people. Chuck Lacey is likely to lead our efforts. And I don't know if you know Chuck, he was CEO of Ben & Jerry's quite a while ago, and he just has amazing experience. And he actually serves on a local school board in Chittenden County, serves on MMU school board. So we're going to focus our efforts on that, and then we'll bring our work product back to you for the board to take a look at. Marianne Sheehan's been involved in talks with Chuck, but GBIC will put money behind this, and we will be reaching out to folks like Ellen Kaler and Tristan and Sarah Buxton, and definitely with you, Tori, and Adam Grinold, to loop them in to get advice from them before we move forward. And I'll just finish up with this. When I see that we're graduating now 5,700 students from high school, and 52% of them are going on to nothing, or they drop out of school, we're talking about 3,000 Vermonters that those are the ones that stay here in Vermont. And if you throw opiates and poverty and everything else on top of it, I'll tell you, maybe 1,000 of them at best are employable, and maybe 600 of them have skills that are going to enable them to make an income that is able to support themselves, not a family. So that's the pipeline. When I look at Vermont's workforce pipeline, that's the pipeline. And changes to CTE and opening up CTE curriculum to 9th grade, even middle school, is what we need to do long range, but that's fixing the pipeline. We probably have a population of 19 to 40-year-olds that I'll bet 15,000 of them are unemployed, unemployable. They don't even enter Matt Berowitz's statistics anymore. So Dan Smith and some other folks, the McClure Foundation, have been focused on that demographic cohort of folks. But I would strongly encourage the Workforce Development Board to be looking at CTE as a primary thing. And I'll just end with, once again, thanking the governor for his leadership. Senator Clarkson, you have done an incredible job. Representative Tolino, it's great to see our leaders in the Senate and the House and the governor come together. Tori, thank you. Adam, thank you. And everyone that's serving in government. It's been a tough time with the pandemic. Thank you for all you do.
Great. Thank you, Frank. Margaret, I know I cut you off earlier, so I don't know if you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So I'm Margaret Pinella White. I'm new to this board. I am the Director of HR and Facilities at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. So I've been in this role since July of last year. So obviously starting at a very challenging time. And what I'd really like to see as part of the Workforce Development Board is space where other businesses, local government can collaborate to actually make change. I feel like I've only been to a couple of board meetings, but I found it really challenging. We have so many talented people in the room, but there doesn't seem to be much room for collaboration yet. So I'm really excited about the direction that we're taking this. Sometimes I feel like at Blue Cross, we're stuck in sort of our own little bubble, but I think a lot of the problems that we're experiencing with hiring and with retention and having to hire people out of state are the same problems that all of you are experiencing. So excited to work together to try to figure this out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Margaret. And that's one of the challenges I think we have had as a board in the past. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think as through these discussions, you know, a big piece of this will be how do we structure both meetings and committees so that everyone is effectively participating and that we're actually tapping into people's expertise where it's most impactful, especially the business community, because those folks are very creative. I'm seeing a bunch of hands, so I will try to police as best I can. John, I think your hand was first.
Great, thank you. I'll try to be quick. John Young with the Vermont Training Program and the Department of Economic Development. And, you know, Tori and Abby, we've certainly talked in the past about, you know, some sort of systemic communication platform. You know, if the board can do anything to, I think there's so many great things happening in Vermont, workforce development wise, pipeline wise, but it seems like we talk to people every day that don't think anything's happening. So with that voice, the other quick piece was I met with a student from a graduate from one of our colleges in Vermont. I'm not going to say what college it was, but had no clue about the industries that were in his field that existed in Vermont. And I know my particular program, and I'm thinking a lot of our programs, just has no money to even talk about our programs. So maybe, you know, the board in the future potentially, why can't we start running some infomercials about some of the great businesses we have in Vermont and telling some of our youth that they should stay and look at some of the businesses that we have, because there's really no other promotional monies for that.
That's a great point, John. Thank you. And I think hopefully maybe with some of the money we're saving you all by not doing this at the Capitol Plaza, we can start using that on some marketing stuff as well. So hopefully, I do think though that communications piece of you know what, that's a big part, like portion the role the board can play in communicating with both the job seekers and employers about what services are available to them in a very clear way, because at the end of the day, if we create the perfect system but no one uses it, it doesn't really matter. So we need to make sure that on both sides we're increasing utilization. I saw Jeanette, is her hand?
So this is Janet Bombardier. I just wanted to build on what Frank said, because it's been, I don't know, I'm in a lot of groups like this, right? And I think it's a very important issue, which is these Vermonters, young Vermonters that don't go on to be what I'll just call productive citizens, right? Doesn't really matter what, you know, what that job is, but they're certainly not becoming productive citizens. And I don't know, Frank, if the work you're talking about will cover this or not, but I don't think we've done a really good job, at least that I'm aware of recognizing that is a big problem we have to go after. There's a much better solution to save those kids than to try to import that many people. And maybe I saw Patricia on the call from VMAC. But, you know, even using a VMAC problem solving approach to this, what can we do? Is it getting to the middle schoolers before the kids go down these paths? Is it starting CTE in 9th grade? I think there's a lot of opinions out there, but we've never really structured a plan and really said to ourselves, we are saving those kids. They are the most important part of our workforce. I just believe we have to double down on that.
Great, thank you. Hal?
Yes, hi. I'm sorry my camera's not working, but this is Hal Cohen. I'm Executive Director of Vermont Adult Learning. And actually, what Frank said and now what Jeanette said, it really fits in with some of the things that we're seeing. There's a whole group of Vermonters there's almost 40,000 Vermonters without a high school diploma. CTE for sure can be a great option, but it's not an option if folks don't have certain basic skills and don't have a high school diploma. So there also needs to be that focus on adult education for those people who school didn't work for them. They're not going to go back into a regular classroom. But though that's a segment of our workforce that we do need to focus on and get them the basic skills, get them a high school diploma so that they then could go on to do trainings that can move them up within the workforce.
Great, thank you. And I think one of the things too, these are such important conversations, and you know, as we start to develop the plan in the coming months and everyone has input, you know, we can talk about how does the board fit into that vision, right? And how do we, you know, hold, you know, service providers accountable or help connect them to make it better? I think everyone can keep that in the back of their mind, is how can the board be a part of that progress, and how can we measure our success in being a part of that progress? And then, you know, again, maybe part of it is making recommendations for other folks in the system. Deborah Green, I can't see the last of your last name, but oh, Deborah from Green Mountain, sorry.
Okay. I'm Deborah Wright. I own Green Mountain Traffic Control. I don't know if you care to hear from an employer. I'm not sure then why I got invited. Everybody else seems to be part of an organization. But I understand all the things that you're doing, and I applaud you for trying to make these efforts and make things better. But as an employer in the state since '03, I have to say that there are things that need to be fixed that are broken. For instance, Department of Labor in the last 10+ years, not getting any help from them, no referrals, no nothing, although they capture a lot of people in the range from teens to from 18-year-olds to 40+-year-olds who need work but aren't working. And I have not seen any effort from there. I understand the whole thing about building younger workers or building them into workers for our community in the future and trying to find them ways to make a living here that makes sense and for them to stay. I get all that. But there are a lot of broken pieces already going on in the state of Vermont, and that could be fixed, and those might help, and a business owner and all business owners, because every field is looking for more workers and cannot get them. It's not just about replacement workers, it's about people who left the system during the pandemic and don't seem to plan on returning. There's some broken pieces that need to get fixed. Building new outlets to bring in new workers isn't all that we need to do. We need to fix the parts that were supposed to work in Vermont, but do not work. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Deborah. And I think, you know, that's a part of the, you know, we acknowledge the fact that we are definitely not perfect at what we do. And I think, you know, that's the point of these conversations, is to help move us forward and to help, you know, move forward in a positive way. So, yeah, and we appreciate any employer input. I'll move over to Ellen.
Yes, hi. I think part of what the board needs to do in thinking about these areas of focus is around really identifying what are the strategies within those 4 areas, who's best suited to actually do that work, and then what are the metrics that we're going to use to actually evaluate whether or not we're getting the job done. And I think that part of the work of the board is to also really evaluate the existing service delivery that is happening in the state, because it was built at a time when there were plenty of workers and we needed more jobs. And now things are flipped. And for the foreseeable future, we are going to be in an environment in which we have more jobs available than what we have workers to fill those jobs. And thus that really requires us to take a really good hard look at the way that we built programs over the last 40 to 50 years to service employer needs, and because it's a completely different environment. And I think that's an important role for this board to play at the elevation that we're supposed to be staying at.
Yeah, Ellen,
oh, and one other thing, sorry.
Go ahead.
I also think that we too often preference the workforce system focused on the largest employers. And I get it, there's a smaller number of them, so it's easier to service a smaller number of large employers, and they do represent about 60% of all the workers. But we are by far a small business state. and a micro business state. And so we do not do enough, I think, in this state to really service medium and really small scale businesses. Vermont standard small, you know, that 5, 10, 20 person shop. We need to have specific workforce initiatives that are really designed for their needs, because they're going to be different needs than what, say, a Global Foundries or a UVM Medical Center or somebody else needs. And that's not to discount what the larger ones need. It's just that they're different, and we should have different strategies to meet different needs.
Yeah, I think that's good. Well said. Matt McKinney.
Hi, Matt McKinney. I'm the CEO of the Institute for American Apprenticeships located in Williston, Vermont. We work with Vermont companies and companies across the U.S. Developing pipeline workforce development programs, including apprenticeship. But I want to talk for a minute about actually something I've seen go really well in Vermont, and it's going to make one of the people on this call smile because I can see a familiar face. My career before Vermont High Tech, I was a global director of workforce development in a company in the Upper Valley that employed more than 500 Vermonters. And as a workforce development director, I had to interact with workforce development systems in both New Hampshire and Vermont based on where we were located. And I had a really positive experience with Vermont, and I guess I wanted to share why, because I think it's a model that can be thought about as it relates to the state of Vermont. So the VABIR system and Creative Workforce Solutions, hello Nat, how are you? Had a coordinator position that came into the organization and essentially taught me or navigated the workforce system for me in the state of Vermont. Because it was said even on this meeting, but it's been said a couple times in this call, that there's a lot of good programs, but oftentimes they work in silos, and businesses don't have the time and can't wait to navigate a system. But if you've got somebody that shows up and says, hey, help me understand what your problems are, and they'll bring those 10 systems in the room that will help you, magic happens. And what I mean by magic is we were employing 1, maybe 2 Vermonters that had known barriers to employment at the time that I met this coordinator. And by the time we were done, we had over 50. And it happened almost seamlessly. And it happened at the speed of business. And it wasn't different organizations. And it wasn't even the organizations in Vermont doing anything differently. It was the fact that I was aware of them and I knew how to connect with them. And I had this person, Amanda Moore, she's a superstar, helping me make all those connections. I talked to her once a week. She made recommendations. She introduced us to people, and it was magic. And I got to tell you, that didn't happen in New Hampshire. The resources are completely different. So there's a lot of really good things going on, but I think that coordinator or seeking to understand the business's needs and then having somebody that can make those connections is incredibly important. I emulated that model in the design of the Recovery Friendly Workplace Initiative in the state of New Hampshire with the United Way as part of that group. And it also worked brilliantly. Somebody that goes into businesses and understands what needs are can help remove barriers, overcome negative perceptions of certain workforce populations that they think can't work in their organizations when they absolutely can. Because other points that were made in the meeting are incredibly important, right? Sometimes to get things done, you need to create a bit of a sense of urgency. Well, nobody thought the pandemic was going to come, but one of the things that did is employers are now more open to new ways of bringing or pipelining talent into their organization than they ever were, because they're desperate, right? We don't want to see them be desperate, but right now, if you have options for them, they're going to consider ones that they never have before. So it is really important for us to take advantage of this opportunity and prove all of the wonderful programs that are in the state of Vermont work. And again, I think the way to do it is to look at some of the models that are really successful in Vermont and try to emulate those and make it seem like one resource to a business. Because especially the comment made about large businesses versus small, right? When you get outside of New England, that definition completely changes. But in Vermont, New Hampshire, when we talk large and small, if you're an organization that has 20 people, you've probably got one person doing your recruiting, your HR, your payroll, everything. So thinking that that person also has time to go out and navigate the workforce system, it just doesn't happen. They don't have it. So if there's a way to make that efficient and connect them to the programs, like I saw with the coordinator at Creative Workforce Solutions in the Vaybear system, I think you're going to be successful and you'll see those programs flourish. And I'll stop talking because I can talk a lot. Thank you.
That also reminded me of one thing Ellen said that actually sparked my interest. I think one of the things that this is not necessarily just a board conversation, this needs to happen at the federal level, but also at the state level, is we need to make sure the system is nimble. I mean, we're going to go through times of high unemployment, and we're also going to go through right now a time of low unemployment, but we have a massive need for jobs. And I think one of the biggest flaws we've seen with the WIOA funding, and that's a federal issue, that's not our purview, but we've asked, we've given some input on this for the next iteration, is it's meant for a time like 2008. It's meant for a time like the Great Depression. It's meant for a time where you have a lot of people needing services on the employer side, and we have to kind of switch that over. So I think the nimbleness is going to be something we need to look into, about how can we make it so the system can effectively help employers when they're the ones who really have a need, and affect the employees or the workers whenever they're the ones who really have a need. I'm going to move over to Brian, and hopefully I'm moving everyone in order, but I'm trying to do the best I can.
Thanks, Tori. Brian Emerson, I'm a director of a career and tech center. First off, I want to thank Frank for supporting CTE, and of course I agree with him. I think there's some movement that we can do in CTE that's right under our nose that could really help with some of these issues. And I know Abby and Tori, I've been at meetings with you, and you've heard my mantra before, but I did want to mention that there's a lot of prevailing data out there, and Matt talked about, looking at models that have proven to be successful. Well, CTE has proven to be successful. The percentage of a chance of a student staying in Vermont and working in Vermont if they attend a CTE center is, I can't recall, but it's almost like 3 times if they didn't. And so, there's data there that supports, if you want them to stay in Vermont, get them to go to a CTE center, and the odds go way up. Now, secondly, the problem with that is that we don't get the majority of students in Vermont in CTE. At best, we might get a third. That means that are 2/3 of students that never come to CTE. And if they don't, and I know Abby and Tori, we had some other data that we saw at one meeting that showed, that they may or may not get any connection to local industry and local business. And anecdotal information, for many years, I've seen students that come back in adult ed and say, well, I never knew these jobs were here when I graduated. That's why I left. So I think there's a lot of data out there that supports, if we really want to move education forward with making these connections to grow the workforce development, CTE is the answer. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Chris, is that a new hand or an old hand? You're muted. You gotta unmute yourself, I think.
It's not a fair question. Both my hands are old.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
2 things. One's a question, and I'll ask that at the end because it could be completely asinine, but I'll leave that to the end. I did want to echo something that Matt McKenney said. I've had a lot of great interactions with Creative Workforce Solutions. And I think that's a national model now. And I thought there were some discussions with, and I don't want to, put VDOL in a bad position, but I think there were some conversations that they were going to try to use that same model. The reason why I think that's a successful model, a lot of smaller businesses in the state and large businesses don't understand the inner workings of how the state government works. So to have one person to go to, a contact, and the way CWS was set up was they had folks in various regions throughout the state. So if I need employees down in Rutland, I had Chris Basque that I reached out to, or Amanda Moore in another area of the state. When I worked with her, I think she was down in the Springfield area. But going around and talking to these folks, they would then go ahead, talk to their counterparts in various component organizations in that area to help find employees for us. And then they would ask some probing questions in terms of what our needs were, what type of skill sets there were, and so forth. And then what I think is important is they also linked in, one of them I just talked to the other day. They have someone that lives in Winooski. I need the person in South Burlington is helping with such areas of like transportation, for example, how to get to and from the client site to do their work. So I want to echo what Matt said. It was very important as an employer. I know a little bit more about how the agencies work in Vermont, but many employers don't. So to have that conduit that can help reach out to the appropriate folks to get to employees was huge. The second point I want to make is my question is one area, and I'm going to beat this drum because I guess I'm a little bit selfish. For me, one of the areas of concern is I'm able to hire someone, but then we have the conversation in terms of, oh, wait a minute, what are the hours again? I'm having issues with childcare. So I know it might be out of our purview, but I wonder if one area of consideration at some point, especially as I'm seeing this become more and more of an issue being addressed in the legislature and so forth, is there something with career pathways to get people lined up in terms of into a childcare positions and a career pathways there? Because if we're lacking employees, if we start looking at funding for health for childcare, are we going to have the appropriate number of people to help care for those children? I don't know if that's a bad question to ask now or not, but that's just something I want to throw out there.
No, not a bad question to ask, and there's a lot of proposals about that specific question.
That's huge for me and a lot of small businesses that I talk to and large businesses.
And I think also, like, you raise a good point, right? Like, we're not going to be the ones drafting housing policy. We're not going to be the ones drafting the childcare policy necessarily, but we can decide what our role is in supporting and advocating for those policies as a workforce support mechanism, right? We're probably not going to be the ones deciding the public health stuff. That's out of our purview, but we can be, saying we support X, Y, and Z for workforce housing. So I think part of these conversations is not necessarily saying we take this stand on housing or we decide this position necessarily right now, but it's saying, okay, this is what the board is going to do to advocate and support for the things that we all know impact the workforce outside of just training and recruiting folks to come into the state. And Senator Clarkson, I saw your hand. I just want to let everyone know, though, we have like only a couple minutes left in this breakout session, so we'll convene in just a second, but go ahead, Senator Clarkson.
No, just quickly to respond to Chris, we have invested like tens of millions of dollars in upskilling, training childcare workers, supporting the businesses of childcare. So the whole piece of both bringing people into childcare, paying them better. We spent millions incentivizing their pay and increasing their pay this year. So Let's Grow Kids and Building Bright Futures have been incredible partners in this, and you can see a lot of that on their website, what we've accomplished, and we're happy to get back to you with more of that. But it's a huge area of big investment right now.
Yeah, especially for the jobs that have to be in person, right? When manufacturing and hospitality, retail, a lot of those jobs, it really requires them to be at odd hours and all of that. So yeah, we recognize that's an issue. So we're going to transition back into the full group, but I just want to say, first of all, thank you all for your participation. And this conversation is not like a one and done. And I want to just acknowledge the fact that part of these conversations is we're going to learn more about some of the existing work happening in agencies to help better coordinate their services as well. There's a lot of good work going on. I think we could highlight them all day. So I want to flag that and say, like, it's not all bad. The system's not all bad, like, at all. There's a lot of good that's happening. I think we can all be moving in the same direction a lot better. So with that, again, this is not just a one-done conversation. I will be setting up one-on-ones with everyone in the meeting regardless throughout the month of June. But we'll also be having definitely many other points of engagement so that you all can consistently have thoughts as we continue to develop this plan, so that by the time we're in October, it's something everyone feels very comfortable with and happy with. So thank you all for participating. We appreciate all of your grace with all the tech, and then we're gonna move over into the big session now.
I'll have to go really quick.
Is anything, is there sound?
Not quite yet. We just didn't want you to hear all the background noise.
Okay, so you haven't started again.
But folks are coming back right now.
Got it, got it, got it.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to have her go first. Perfect. Okay, we're gonna do some very brief report outs. So I'm gonna start with Kendall. I've talked about her group.
Sure. Hi, everybody again. Kendall from Governor Scott's office. Our group was able to briefly touch on all 4 of the different buckets, but some larger themes that emerged within some potential strategies and actions within those. We're acting as a convener, identifying where the gaps are as we do some resource mapping, for example, and then ways the board can amplify things like best practices, both for workers and employers, and really zero in on what the priorities are in terms of the information that needs to be amplified.
We had the commissioner.
So the group did touch on all of them, although we spent a lot of our time on the first 2. The big theme, I think, along with Kendall's point, was we focused a lot on what would the role of the board be in these certain circumstances. So when we talk about retention and recruitment or system alignment, we talked about being action oriented, but focused on those actions that the board could actually take and what would it look like. I think we talked a lot about being the convener or the sharer of best practices. So trying to be the string that connects all the partners across the state. And then we also talked about the fact that just by our board members, we could be or have the opportunity to drive policy both to the governor and also from the governor down to us on how to implement those initiatives or support those initiatives. But at the end of the day, when people talk about the fact that they don't know the system or understand the system or know all the players, there's a role that the board can play there in helping to bring those partners together and then also highlight best practices and maybe something like a specific calendar as a way to just cross-pollinate ideas and share new information.
Great, thank you. Adam, your group?
Sure. I think probably we were in agreement that the system alignment was the number 1 sort of objective to tackle. We couldn't wait for the others to begin on those, but with that, sort of everything else would start to work well. The area where we thought we would be most effective if that alignment took place was through the communication. So if we became the center of the workforce system, people would just come to us. It would make the communication that much easier. So by convening folks, we'd gather data, and then we would communicate that data. And then we looked at, after system alignment, we went into, which was our second one?
No.
Let me get back to my notes. I thought we were doing the chart. After the system alignment, we talked about, relocation and recruitment. So for relocation recruitment, we felt that really we didn't play a big role. Again, if we were successful in system alignment, that everything else for the relocation recruitment would become easier. But that we really needed the system to be working for the recruitment and retention to happen successfully. But the role we could play was putting a big spotlight on housing, on childcare, on the limiting agents to that recruitment. that would be a good role for the board. And then lastly, we only got through 3. We did education and training. And again, focusing on the role of convening, of understanding where the limitations were within the system, and making sure that we could really help a student or a family navigate through high school, through the system, out of high school, into a credentialing, into college, later on in life, always having that system supporting them wherever they were. And that would be a role of the board to communicate that pathway, so that people could understand it, because it's really confusing and complicated for folks to know without some sort of system.
For the virtual session, we talked a lot about system alignment as well. I think, and similarly to Commissioner's group, we talked about, the various big picture workforce goals. What role can we play? So for example, housing, right? Our role is not necessarily to make the housing policy, but how do we advocate or support existing policy or existing legislation in a way that supports the workforce needs, or we just are advocates for more housing or whatever. We also talked a lot about the connection of services and how we need to make sure that the system is well understood by all the players, but also by the businesses and the workers, and that we have a nimble structure that can work in times of high unemployment, can work in times of low unemployment, and isn't just built for one specific system, as well as adapting to the needs of both our small, Vermont small, not just nationwide small businesses, and our larger employers, and balancing some of those. So again, very similar to a lot of what you all talked about, which is, really strengthening the way that our system works together and getting rid of a lot of silos. Great. Wonderful. Do you want next steps after this, or do you have anything else?
Well, I think I'll just briefly say thank you guys for participating. I know I had a lot of fun in my group. It sounds like there are a lot of common threads discussed in terms of where you all are thinking the board can go. I know we don't have as much time as we ideally in an ideal world would have today to kind of discuss further and think about what those common threads are, but I know they exist. And so I know that this team, will be supporting Tori and Abby and kind of pulling all this together coming out of discussions today. So thank you all very much. We're excited to continue to support your work going forward, hopefully. Thanks for having us. And Tori, I'll turn it over to you.
So just for some next steps, obviously we had a lot of great discussions, but I'm sure it's no surprise to everyone that these were very initial discussions. We didn't come forward with like a full plan after today. So the 3 of us we're going to review a lot of the information and talk about some of the themes, and then Abby and I will work with the operating committee and others to start to distill some of this information and disseminate it so that we can start to move forward in the initial phase of our plan, which is identifying stakeholders, identifying necessary data points that we need, and really forming the different groups that will be looking at the state plan, as well as reaching out to each of you about your thoughts and comments, and one-on-one meetings with everyone as we are back in that season. So I'm looking forward to that. But if you look in your folder, again, we have the timeline, and folks don't need to necessarily have anything off the top of their head right now. But that's generally the type of timeline. And I actually don't have. I have one right here. I promise I do.
Well, phase 1, May to June.
Yeah. So phase 1, May to June, is really establishing what we kind of what Commissioner talked about, which is establishing our goals with the end in mind. So talking about So again, we have this meeting today, and we're going to have our first meeting of the strategic plan working group, which will be the operating committee, as well as folks from some of the sector and industry-based committees. That's not the only place where we're going to be soliciting engagement. We'll be soliciting engagement from everyone in this room regularly and often. But we'll begin to kind of determine, first of all, what voices have to be a part of this conversation, what data has to be a part of this conversation. And again, kind of working with some of the work that Ellen and Tristan had done to map out the system, identifying first and foremost a 50,000 foot view of the system and where the board plays a role. Then going into phase 2, we'll have probably two meetings of the strategic plan working group, as well as the committees will do their monthly meeting, and talking about, let's talk about roles. Let's hone in on what our actual goals are and start to brainstorm on what the activities are to achieve those goals, as well as performance measures and accountability for us. And then again, phase 3, we'll ultimately have our full in-person board meeting. We might, depending on the feedback and the way that it's coming in, we might schedule a midsummer virtual all board meeting just as like a touch base for anyone's feedback, get everyone's thoughts on how the plan is currently moving forward, but that's TBD. But we'll definitely have an in-person October meeting where we kind of go through the state plan and review it. But at that point, I hope everyone here will have had plenty of input. Everyone on Teams will have had plenty of input so that we feel comfortable to approve the strategic plan and then get to work. So any questions? Go ahead.
Well, not a question, but a comment. I mean, I feel like the development of a strategic plan may be useful and helpful, but I'd love to see us working towards some point a calendar year press conference. You might think of it as where we as a board were making consensus recommendations that we had said, look, we've distilled all these different things. We have 3 things that we fully agree on. We can figure out what consensus means. I'm not sure what that, but I suspect we would come to consensus and agreement on a number of priorities that would then be put out to state agencies, the legislature, boards, other boards that say govern apprenticeships and that type of thing. But we haven't done that before. But I think sort of putting into this calendar a point where we say we're going to work towards holding a press conference in November where we identify consensus thoughts and recommendations. And I think putting a pin on the calendar would move us towards that. So I would just suggest something like that, and I'm not sure if maybe the executive committee can consider that, because I don't think we have.
Yeah, having it come to a head at some point. Yeah, that makes sense.
The only action we've taken in the last 5 years is to approve the WIOA state plan. So I'm feeling like we're underperforming in some ways.
Yeah,
that's a great idea as far as the conclusion. We have a strategic plan. We want to announce it. What is the focus? And we've learned today that that's an important part of our role is to communicate that. I think Tori's comments earlier about there's never been a better time to be in workforce development are really apt. We have all of the employers who now are very attuned to this. We have all of state government. We have all the organizations across the state. So we have an amazing opportunity in front of us. It's just sort of grabbing all of the different resources to align into the strategic planning exercise to bring everybody together to get that forward. So, I think, I hope everybody leaves here excited and jazzed up by that opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, we're turning that page in the chapter or closing the book to a new one, whatever we want to use, but it's looking forward again instead of just that reaction. So we all did a bunch of great work together a few years ago, and we're ready to stand on our own shoulders and move that forward. I know we had promised the folks online to be able to have some comments read. Do we want to provide that opportunity? Were there any?
Does anyone from the Teams meeting have any last kind of thoughts before we move over to adjournment and survey?
One last thing I think as we allow maybe folks to send in their questions is what's missing? What have we not included here? Who's missing? Is there an entity that is missing from our work as a board, our work in this strategic planning? And if so, let's please, I ask everybody online as well as here to send those to Tori and Abby, just to make sure we have everybody participating. It would be such a waste. I think everybody agrees there's a lot happening in workforce right now, and that we don't want to see redundancy or sort of a waste of anybody's time or effort. So bringing everybody together at this point in time is critical. So please send those ideas on.
And also just to note, if you come up with an idea in the middle of the night or randomly during a work day, or you hear something that strikes a tone with you, please email us, reach out to us, call us. There's not like a wrong time to give us your feedback and input. So we'd want to hear that for sure.
Anything, Abby, online? Okay, so let's, Tori, move on to just introducing that survey and
Yeah, so before we adjourn, everyone in their packets should have a kind of debrief survey. Hopefully you have a pen with you. We have extras, I think, if you don't. And just fill that out. It's anonymous. We're gonna use them to make sure that the meetings go as well as possible every single time.
Are you doing a virtual version of it?
We're gonna email it.
Okay.
And it's
Okay, so-
double-sided, right?
Yeah, front and back.
so with that, I think we will have concluded today's agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you, folks, for joining us virtually, and we are adjourned. Great.
Yeah, why not?
No, you wave. That's when the meeting's over, you wave.
Great. Well, that was a blast. That's great.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Yeah, we, yeah.